Hello and welcome to The Green Room by Deloitte. This is the podcast which asks the tricky questions about the world around us. I'm George Parrett, and this is episode number 41, where we ask, where do you start when everything matters? Hello, thank you so much for downloading this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. You can find all of our previous episodes on our website, which is deloitte.co.uk/Green Room Podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts from, or subscribe. That's easier, isn't it? And I'm not sure about anyone else, but I've got a monumental to-do list today. I've ticked off introducing the podcast. Now I need to introduce my wonderful colleague, the dangerously organised Lizzie Elston. How are you, Lizzie?
I wish that was true. Dangerously organised. I'm going to take that. I like it. I'm very well, thank you, George. Always excited to be at the start of another podcast episode, and this one is looking particularly exciting. We really do get the best guests, so I can't wait to get stuck into conversation with them. And the topic is something very close to my heart. Obviously. How the planet is going to be hopefully saved. We'll find out a bit more about that. But also, as you said, the whole to-do list thing, where do you start when everything matters? It is a very good question, and one which I struggle with regularly. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
I think everyone knows that the biggest priority we have is our planet. But I think, given everything else that's going on in our daily life, sometimes it can seem a bit of a monumental task, can't it? So we're sort of exploring that. Where do you start when everything matters? But Lizzie, I mean, we can give it our best shot. But I think actually we probably need some fabulous guests to really help us through this one. Who do we have in the studio with us this week?
So I'm delighted, first of all, to introduce Hannah Jones. Hannah is the CEO of the Earthshot Prize, a prize and platform founded by Prince William to search, spotlight and scale solutions that can help repair and regenerate the planet this decade. She's a social and environmental advocate who believes in the power of entrepreneurism, innovation and collaboration to affect systems change. Before Earthshot, she spent over 20 years at Nike and was their first Chief Sustainability Officer. Welcome, Hannah.
Thank you very much.
Also delighted to be joined by Kat Lampen. So Kat is the Sustainable Finance Lead at Deloitte and leads our UK Sustainability and Climate Change team. She has over 20 years' experience developing strategic responses to sustainability matters and addressing associated governance, risk, compliance and operational issues. Kat has advised boards on everything from decarbonisation strategy to human rights violation in supply chains. She's also the sponsoring partner for the Earthshot Prize, leading our collaboration as implementation partner. Welcome, Kat.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here.
Great to have you here. And this is the time when we kick off with an icebreaker, which has just appeared. And the question for you is this, well, for all of us, is this. What city in the world, other than where you live now, would you like to live in and why? Anyone? I might kick that one off because it's quite easy for me to answer that one. Although I don't live there now, I have lived there, and that's Sydney. Great city, on the water, great food, great people. Happy to go back there anytime.
That sounds good, Lizzie. I think I'm going to tick off another favourite city of mine. I've never been to Sydney actually, but I'd love to go. But it's going to have to be the Big Apple, NYC. I think for me, it's sort of big and brash and loud, and lots of burgers, and right up my street there. So I'm going to always catch a musical a few months before they come to London. So I think that's me all over really.
Fabulous. Hannah or Kat?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to go. I'm actually living in Portland, Oregon, and in the middle of packing up my bags, my life, to move to London. And I'm really happy about it. I think London is the city that I had on my wish list to come live back again in after many years of being out in the wilderness of America. But if I had to choose another place, it wouldn't be a city. It would be a little island off the coast of Portugal where I spent 8 months with my daughter during COVID, called Madeira, which many of you Brits will know. And I lived in a minuscule little village to the west of the island and swam every day, and it was idyllic. So it wouldn't be a city, but it would be an island.
That sounds fabulous. I want to go there now.
And I'm definitely the same as Hannah. It would not be a city. I think when you spend every day of your working life in a city, the last thing you want to do is go to another one. So I think I would probably go to Costa Rica and reside in the rainforest there, which is so beautiful.
Fantastic. We've got through the icebreaker moment, and I think it's about time we get stuck into this week's discussion. So, Kat and Hannah, could you talk to our listeners about how you decided to get into climate in your careers? Was there ever a sort of aha moment for you, both of you really, when deciding to, work in the climate space? Hannah, would you like to go first there?
Yeah, sure. When I was growing up, I was very much focused on social justice. I really focused on equity. I focused on the issues that were facing young people. That was what made my heart beat really hard, was to think about how I could play a role in changing the world for humans. And as I went on that journey, particularly when I first joined Nike and started working on human rights in supply chains and gender rights in supply chains, what became really clear to me was that we couldn't solve humans' rights or humanity's problems unless we solved the problems we'd imposed upon nature. And I suppose one of the stories I'll give you is we realized that the women in the supply chain in Bangladesh, I think it was back in like the early 2000s, were facing huge hardship because there'd been drought followed by floods. And therefore, the price of rice had gone up triple, if not quadruple, but their wages hadn't. And it became so starkly clear to me that if we didn't think about climate change as a human issue, we were not going to end up in a good place. And we needed to understand that they were all interconnected, that the environment and our social injustice were absolutely part and parcel. And that's continued to be a theme throughout my career, working on refugee issues and working on rights issues. It always comes back to the injustices that happen because of climate change impact those that are the most vulnerable first.
And mine started very early as well. So probably at the age of 7, when in my local pond, someone had chucked a can of oil into it and it started killing all of the tadpoles, which I then decided that I should rescue. Took them all home, put them in a bucket under my bed, and my mum will tell you the rest of the story, but that did not end well for me or the tadpoles. But was done in good favour. But no, seriously, when I studied environmental economics, and I think the most striking thing was that the environment just really wasn't considered in those equations. And my first job out of university was to interview CEOs actually on sustainability, and we're going back to the early 2000s now, but I would go and say, what do you think about climate change? And I'd just get a blank response. So I felt very much from an early point that it was my duty to go and help companies understand how the climate is important to them, how they rely on natural resources and the other issues that rotate around those types of things.
Gosh, Kat, hearing you talk about those tadpoles, I mean, sorry, I know that everything else you just said was massively important, but just back to the tadpoles, it does remind me of my own little story of trying to rescue a butterfly with a broken wing, which ended up in an ice cream box with a piece of orange in our kitchen. And similarly, it didn't end too well, but desperate to help.
The good thing was the tadpoles did survive into frogs, but when I got home from school and there were thousands of frogs appearing from my bedroom, that did not go down well.
I'm surprised you survived.
I know. Even when I go back there now, there's hundreds of frogs everywhere when I go home. So, yeah.
Oh my goodness, it's like intergenerational reminder of your act of mercy that you took.
Free the frogs. Hannah, you spent many years at Nike and helped push many of their social and sustainability programs. I'm sure some things went really well and others were scrutinized in the media. What did you learn from the experience?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, I learned a lot. I feel like I've got tons of battle scars. I was actually at Nike for 22 years, believe it or not. And I joined in 1998. And that's relevant because A, it means I'm horribly old. 2, it means that if you can cast your minds back to 1998, there was no such thing as corporate responsibility or ESG or sustainability. John Elkington, who was one of my heroes, is still one of my mentors, had just published the book on the triple bottom line. And, I think those of us in the movement were like, wow, this is my Bible. And everyone else was like, what just happened? But I joined Nike because of the social issues they were facing. Nike was really in the headlines for accusations of sweatshops. And it was one of the first times that the not-for-profit and the activist movement had worked out that if you associated a social issue with a corporation and a brand, you could galvanize movements for change around that. And as someone that came out of that movement somewhat, I thought that was enormously clever and very appropriate to put the pressure on the corporations. So I had this inflection point where I was like, I'm going to jump into working with one of those corporations and try to be the change agent from the inside. And the journey that the team and I went on over those 16 years of being the Chief Sustainability Officer and working with the teams was to go on that journey of what does it take to change from the inside when your entire business model had never taken into account environmental or social change as part of the bottom line. That just wasn't how it was built. There were no case studies at Harvard or MBAs in sustainability. A couple of things that I learned was transparency is our friend. Honesty is our friend. Talking about the challenges rather than trying to masquerade that they're not there doesn't solve the issues. And one of the pivotal moments for us was when we became one of the first companies to publish a corporate responsibility report in which we laid out quite barely the challenges that we faced operating in a global supply chain that we didn't control or own, and how we were operating in 52 countries, all of whom had their own approach to regulation or their own approach to enforcing regulation and no common standards. And it really was a moment of shift. So first lesson I learned was transparency is an incredibly important tool to use, and to use it to engage people to help you solve these intractable problems with you, as opposed to trying to shoulder it on your own. The second big insight that came through was, for a long time, we were corporate responsibility. That was our title. And I probably had the least interesting office space in the whole building, and people probably walked the other way down the corridor very quickly whenever they saw me coming, because they're like, oh my God, there's that woman, she's going to come and nag me about human rights and environment, and I'm trying to do my business and meet my margins. And after a while, I'm like, this kind of sucks. I kind of don't think being a policing and compliance function is quite what we should be doing. So we pivoted multiple times. And the first pivot was to make the business case, for why being more sustainable, putting workers right at the heart and social impact right at the heart of your business model was actually great for business. And we brought in a lot of business people, including people like Kat with the economics and the numbers to do that. And that worked pretty well. When I could equate to my CFO that waste was actually a cost and a drag on his business, he got really passionate about waste. And then what we realized was we're hitting a next frontier, which is that actually to be sustainable requires innovation. And what we are asking the world to do is to innovate. It's to create new business models. It's to create new processes and materials and supply chains and ways of working. And when we unleashed this message of sustainability is an innovation and growth challenge, the company lit up. And I went from our team being the ones tucked at the back behind the toilets on the third floor behind in the last building at the end of campus, to us being center of the conversation with the designers and the advanced innovations and the R&Ds and the people investing in new businesses. And so my big takeaway for us is we have this incredible opportunity to do what humans do really well, which is to imagine better. And in imagining better, we can reduce the frictions of today and actually transform our economies and our businesses and our communities. And it doesn't have to feel like it's something that's being taken away or less. It can actually be better. And it's a call to arms in many ways for me to enlist innovators from around the world to think about the environment as the next big frontier for innovation and new models of growth.
It's incredibly inspiring to listen to that and hear you say that, Hannah. And you know, you mentioned bringing in Kat at times and people like Kat to sort of crunch the numbers, etc. So Kat, question for you is, you must have seen climate transition from nice to do for clients to an absolute must if they're to succeed in the future. How are you helping navigate them through this?
Yeah, well, I mean, it has changed, and I've been at Deloitte for 17 years now, actually. I originally joined the sustainability and climate change team back then, and I can tell you that the work has changed considerably in that time, which is good. So I think companies are definitely moving in terms of what they understand sustainability should be, from a comms exercise into something that's integral to everything that they do. So we are helping them on that journey. So, and for many, it's a complete transformation journey. There are fewer and far between in terms of those companies that don't get the bigger piece here. And I think the ones that are missing out on understanding climate change and other sustainability issues and how it impacts them will lose out in the long run. So we help clients everything from identifying what their risk looks like, measuring it, understanding how they have to change their strategy, whether that be through products or through innovation, right through to how they report that externally. And then there's also the kind of regulatory side of it, which is changing rapidly at the moment. So helping companies navigate that is a really important part of what we're doing.
Both of those responses are just really fascinating and really set the scene, I think, for our listeners really well. And we're talking about climate change, which is hugely mainstream. The COP26 last year put it back on everyone's agenda, and I think it would be really good for our listeners if each of you could maybe say what's giving you hope at the moment. I know, Hannah, Earthshot as a concept is kind of designed around hope. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say I always worry that when people think of hope, they think that it's maybe just someone being hopeful doesn't have legs to it. So what I like to say, and the team likes to say, is we have urgent optimism, and we have deep optimism because of what we see. So the Earthshot Prize is a global prize awarding amazing solutions with awards every year. We look at oceans and biodiversity, we look at climate change and clean air and waste, and we search the earth literally for incredible game changers, innovators, entrepreneurs and leaders who are bringing to the table solutions that, if they were scaled, could make a massive impact on regenerating and repairing the planet. So in that search process, we get to meet and to see incredible people doing incredible things. And I think that it's largely unseen. I think it's happening beneath the surface. We're all very distracted as a world at the moment. But there is this incredible movement happening, if you think about it as a wave that's happening under the surface, of people that are dedicating their careers and their lives and their talents to this purpose, as opposed to thinking of it as something that they do at the periphery. And they're actively trying and seeking to find solutions that could really make a difference. So when I see the 1,000 nominations that we just had come into our pipeline of nominations this year, I mean, I'm kind of like almost giddy with hope and optimism, because this is the future. These solutions are going to shape our world. And so our job with Kat's team is to vet them, to go down to that place where we can find the ones that are really robust and spark the world's imagination, and then turbocharge them by putting the spotlight on them, by awarding them with £1 million each, but then also by galvanizing even further support around them so they can go to scale. So that for me fuels my optimism around, actually, there's way more happening in the world than the media or any of us necessarily know. And I think there's Buckminster Fuller, who those of you that know, the quote was, the future is here, it's just not distributed equally. And you have to go look for the future. And when you see it and you can join the dots and see how the future's coming together, it gets pretty exciting.
And Hannah, you mentioned optimism there and urgency as well. And there's the formula, isn't there, which is sort of urgency and optimism equals action. And the converse is also true, and urgency plus pessimism equals despondency. And I suppose what you're describing is very much the former, and it's it sounds like similar, I guess, to many of the things that we face even in our day-to-day work. And if there is urgency but we are feeling downbeat about it, then action is just not going to happen. So it's so interesting to hear you talk about it in that way.
I really believe that to change a system takes all different actors playing a role. So I have huge respect and support activists that are pushing hard on the system and shouting loudly, they have a really important role to play. I think the regulators and the policymakers and the politicians have a hugely important role to play. Where we sit is in believing that if we can showcase and inspire and bring real solutions to the table and help to accelerate them, we can make the change that all of us are going through feel easier. I actually, when I was at Nike, worked with a neuroscientist for about a year who was embedded in our team, helping us think through the impact of sport on mental health. And one of the things that I learned by working with that neuroscientist was that the brain really shuts down in fear. And I think we've all probably experienced a lot of that over the last few years with COVID. But the brain shuts down, and it's very hard for a brain that is in a fight or flight mode to go into a creativity and an optimism mode, because they're different compartments of your brain. And so when we inspire fear in people, for a large number of people, that means they shut down and they're very frightened of fear, of change. We need to be in a place in the world where we're embracing the change and running towards the change because it's going to feel better. And, I liken it to, for example, the innovations that have hit markets over the last decade, we ran towards them. Who knew that from one minute to the next, none of us would book hotels and we'd all go stay in someone's home in their bed? And we all, if you told me that 15 years ago, I'd been like, yeah, you lost the plot. I'm not going to do that. I want to go to the hotel. And now I'm like, oh, I'm going to go another Airbnb, this amazing thing. Who knew that we would stop using our records and our vinyls overnight to embrace the iPod? But we didn't do it because we were told to do it or because we were afraid to do it. We did it because it felt like it was going to have less friction and it was going to be better and more interesting. So my avenue that I continuously push is, let's make this delightful. And I mean that with deepness. I don't mean that trivially. Let's make this change feel like something that's going to be better for all, rather than inspiring so much fear in people where they shut down and they try to resist.
Just going back to the Earthshot prize, which is very, very much about finding solutions and driving that optimism. Obviously, Kat, you're working closely with Hannah and the Earthshot prize, and it would be great to hear about sort of the first year of Earthshot and some of the projects that you're working on.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a fantastic year, and well, it's been more than a year now. But since we originally started working with the Earthshot Prize, I think we've been so impressed with the number of nominees that we've had through, but also the solutions that are coming through and their ability to have a global impact. So all of them are kind of technically impressive, but having that kind of potential to inspire others on critical environmental challenges that sometimes go under the radar. Like, we had nominees last year around things like around stubble farming, around extending the use of consumer goods and zero waste buildings. And it's been really exciting to see lots of different parts of the world thinking about these challenges and how they can go about solving them. So it's been a hugely exciting year for us last year, but then this year, as we're going through the nominees for this year, we've had over 1,000 through. So multiple rounds of screening from our global teams working on this project. So it's a hugely inspiring project, both for our teams internally, but also I think one of the things that really comes through from this project is with the nominees, their willingness to want to work together, to collaborate, to come up with global solutions that can fix the problem as a planet. And I think working in a largely corporate environment, we're used to companies kind of competing against each other and wanting to be one step ahead of the others, but this is quite different, I feel, and it's been really good to see how some of the prize winners are looking at working together, and how the kind of pairing up with corporate organizations, with governments, really kind of help scale this type of project and the types of nominees that we're putting through it.
That's a really important insight, Kat. I just want to pick up on that one. First of all, to say we couldn't do this without the Deloitte team, and it's been an incredible partnership, and just really, really invaluable to how we've all been working together. There's a lot of trust amongst the team as well, and I think it comes down to this idea of collaboration and that insight you brought to the table, Kat, I actually think is a really big macro trend. Yeah. So I think that part of what we're witnessing is a whole new generation of leaders coming up through the lens of purpose and sustainability, and who understand system change needs transparency, collaboration. We can't thrive on competition in the way, and vertical siloed industries the way we used to. And this generation are also giving us insights into how markets are going to need to function in the future, and how economies and communities, every time we kind of shut down boundaries and try and compartmentalize, or we try to compete, usually it doesn't work from a sustainability perspective. If you think about the heat waves that you're experiencing in London right now, that's running across the whole of Europe. We've got wildfires in the west of America. The heat waves don't care about our national boundaries. We're all in this together. And so that idea of leaders that bring collaboration to the fore and humility that comes with that, I think that's actually going to become a leadership trait of the 21st century de facto.
When we're talking about prioritizing, the climate, and you mentioned 1,000 entries for this year's Earthshot prize already, how do you possibly pick the best one, and how do you prioritize, a project which is, going to try and restore mangrove, forests in the Caribbean, or compared to a living wall sort of type project somewhere else? It must be incredibly challenging to choose a couple of winners out of so many good ideas, presumably. And how do you possibly go about doing that?
Well, luckily we've got Deloitte running a very, very rigorous vetting process that has multiple stages and lots of input from global experts inside of Deloitte, but also outside of Deloitte, and ultimately culminates with a prize council meeting, which is, last year, certainly I was witness to it. It was not heated, but certainly painful for everyone to come to decisions because the quality of the submissions was so incredible. I think it's also important to say that from the Duke of Cambridge, as the founder, his constant refrain is, I don't just want the 5 winners to win, I want everybody to win. And so the challenge to us as a team is, how do you expand the impact of the prize, not just on the 5 winners, but on the 15 finalists, and even in future years beyond that. So even that notion of winning and competition in the prize starts to kind of melt down. And I would say one of the things that we've all been very, very focused on is representation and diversity. So one of the filters that we have built into the entire vetting process together has been to have a real eye to making sure that we're bringing to the fore projects and solutions that come from around the world, from different kinds of sectors, different approaches. We're particularly focusing on how do we lift and focus on Indigenous-led and women-led solutions, solutions from the Global South. So there's another piece to this vetting, which is, yes, it's about the quality of the solution, the leadership of the team, and it's also about assuring representation so that we shine the spotlight with equity across the world. Kat, as the one that leads our vetting process, I shall pass it over to you and recuse myself at this stage, because that's a very important piece of it as well.
Yeah, exactly. And we going through all of the nominations, I mean, as I said, we're hugely impressed by them, and it's a difficult process, but I think what we're looking for is something that's really transformational, and that might be the next big tech disruptor, or it could be an activist that's inspiring change. And we saw Vanessa's speech at the COP26, and that had such a huge impact. So I think we're looking for something that's quite different, where things can be complementary, where collaboration can drive action, to kind of make the prize even stronger. So I think that there's a lot of screening processes that we put things through to kind of get to the kind of final selection of prizes, and that involves looking at the kind of quality of the response, and all the way through to the impact it can have at either a local or a global level. So there's many different screening processes we put things through, but it has come to a point over the last year where we feel really confident with the final list of winners. But I think that shouldn't detract from all of the nominees that go through this process, because there isn't one that we would say is not worthy. Everyone's trying to achieve the same goals at the end of the day. So
that's right. And I'm just looking at last year's finalists included a schoolgirl, a non-profit organisation, some tech companies, a city, and a country. So it kind of it's really from the very small to the very big, isn't it? I guess it's quite remarkable.
Yeah, I think it's one of the unique things about the prize, one of the many unique things about the prize, which is we're very much business model agnostic, to use our business terms. So what we care about is the solution, and we actually deliberately want to profile solutions that could be coming through public policy, they could be coming through activism, academia, they might be coming through a startup, they might be coming through a not-for-profit, because what matters is the solution. And that does give us this, as I said previously, it gives you this unique picture into what's happening in the world. So whether it's a 15-year-old in India who's invented a solar panel fueled ironing cart, or it's coral farmers in the Grand Bahamas who've figured out a new way of restoring the coral reefs, or the example that I think we all love is the team in India that understood how to create a machine that would turn stubble away from being burnt by the farmers, but into a new form of fertilizer that would also help their yield and their productivity and reduce air pollution and climate change in doing so. The common theme is imagination, ingenuity, and determination. And that's what you see in this cohort of finalists each time. Is what we're seeing is it's just so inspiring to see people taking their talent and their imagination and saying, I'm going to go and solve this problem, because if I solve this problem, I'm going to be part of a global set of problem solvers and game changers that together we're making change happen at a massive scale. And that sends shivers down my back, and is why I get up every single day super psyched to be a part of this whole project.
Did you know at Deloitte we support social enterprises through our 5 Million Futures programme? One of my favourites is Luminary Bakery in London. They use baking as a tool to take women on a journey to employability and entrepreneurship, equipping them with transferable skills for the working world. Their letterbox brownies are incredible, and they even have a cookbook. If you fancy a taste, just head to luminarybakery.com or check out the show notes. Now, back to our topic of the day. Now, onto the subject of prioritisation, which clearly, as two women in your own roles, no doubt have to do a lot of, and we all have to do in our day-to-day jobs. But I just wonder, Kat, if I can just turn to you about using prioritisation, or helping clients rather to prioritise their green agenda. Mm-hmm. How do you help them do that?
So we typically, from a corporate angle, we would take them through a materiality process to kind of look at what's important to their stakeholders versus what's important to them. So that would look at things like, what do investors think is important versus what do their consumers think is important, right through to kind of activists, governments, etc. And then help them kind of put a matrix together to say this is something significant that we really need to manage properly versus this is a license to operate area that we should focus on. And we do find that lots of companies try and solve everything at the same time, which really does not help them in the long term. There are things that you need to do to kind of manage your sustainability program, have it properly integrated into the business, but having those 2 or 3 things where you can really make an impact is super important, because every company that we work with has that opportunity and has the ideas to do something different and to kind of help the world be more sustainable, whether that be an environmental issue or a social issue. So I think that kind of prioritization of resources is really critical.
And is that the same in terms of scaling these projects up? Because I'll be purposefully provocative here. Does it all boil down to the pound sign at the end of the day? Is it all about sort of profit, and if we help the planet at the same time, then that helps? Or how do we scale up these brilliant ideas to truly make an impact for some of these huge monumental tasks?
I mean, I think that's changing. I mean, you hear the term greenwashing a lot at the moment, and the new one that I've heard is rainbow washing, because it now extends right across all of the ESG issues. But I do think that, companies are looking kind of outside of their own organizations to understand how they can calibrate and how they can scale what they're doing. So we see much more, organizations kind of working with each other to solve some of these sustainability issues than we ever have done before. But it's just not enough. I mean, one of the kind of major frustrations I have working in this area is that there are lots of commitments being spoken about, at AGMs and in the papers, etc. But really, when you kind of start looking behind the surface, often the whole company isn't, brought into that process. And I think the biggest challenge with sustainability at a corporate level is the fact that different functions don't speak together on this. So, if you're setting a strategy, you should be speaking to your finance function, your risk function, your sustainability function, etc., to really understand what the scale of the sustainability issue is and how you work together to resolve that.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges in corporations is the short term versus the long term.
Yeah.
And when you're on a quarterly reporting cadence to the markets, your incentives are often to take shorter term views on the world than maybe if you're thinking about in the way that indigenous communities have led, which is to think 7 generations ahead and 7 generations behind in every decision you make. And we need to find a place in the markets where we're rewarding people for sustainability in very tangible ways, which also means how you power up the CEOs and the companies who are thinking longer term about their future and investing in the future. But it does come down to prioritization. I mean, certainly for us, it was very clear when I was working at Nike, we narrowed it down to the materiality test of where is our biggest impact on the environment. For Nike, it's in the materials, and for the apparel and footwear industry, it's in the materials. And so that's where we pushed on our innovation and our sustainability work. And you have to be able to do trade-offs. Some things will cost and some things will return. So for example, I mentioned before waste. Well, every time you reduce waste, you're putting money back in someone's pocket in a good way. So waste is an easy one to sell, but investing in a brand new material made of mushrooms that's going to take 5 to 10 years to come to market might be a harder sell. And that's where you also need to be thinking, I think, about how you don't get landed with stranded assets and get disrupted by others that are new incumbents in the industry and who might just go straight to mushroom leather, whereas you've been stuck in the old school. So I think part of this is also about predictive scenario playing and playing out the fact that, hey, do I want to have all my investments in old school leather? Or do I want to be like thinking about the fact that probably in the next 5 to 10 years, there's going to be serious amounts of regulation, consumer pressure. How do I start to create pathways that get me into alternatives and allow me to make that a breakthrough leadership moment with the consumer and the markets, and actually get out from being behind on regulation and be in front and shaping regulation. So those from a corporate perspective, that was something that I think is something that is really important. That's why it has to be at the CEO and the board level, this conversation, because that's where all these teams and functions come together. When I moved into the Earthshot Prize, one of the things I kind of brought with me was that idea of how do you actually have a thesis around what you're looking for and what you want to see tipping. So this year we published selection priorities that are a little bit like an investor's investment thesis, which outlined against our 5 Earthshots what our priority areas that we were going to hunt for would look like, because we thought they were areas that were really ripe for tipping points in the next 3 to 5 years. And that's where we tapped into some amazing organizations like Project Countdown or John Durr's book on speed and scale, and our partners and global experts to go, what matters? What are the things that we really have to tip in order to get to a meaningful change in the world? And I think that's a really important part of this conversation is yes, we all need to change our light bulbs, of course, but there are some big rocks that we collectively have to move, and we need to get very focused on how we move them together.
And I would maybe just add to that point around financial services and the investor side of it. So I work quite a lot with the banks and investors on this space, and I think the realization over the last 18 months that, there are a number of organizations that they are lending to or invested in might not be valuable in the future. And the changes that I'm seeing internally on, how they look at that kind of risk appetite and how they're, tilting towards, sustainable lending, green finance flows into other parts of the world is really encouraging at the moment, but there's still a lot that needs to be done. So I think that sector specifically will end up to some degree guiding other sectors, other industries over the next few years, because they will want to know what the transition plan is for oil and gas or big manufacturing companies. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Talking there a lot about sort of change and transformation, clearly that takes a lot of decision making, and I just want to ask you a little bit about sort of making tough decisions. And obviously tough decisions have to be made where you can't back a solid project over a stronger one, or you have to let down certain things or people. And I just wonder if you sometimes worry about whether you're making the right decision with the information that you have now. And I guess when it comes to Earthshot, obviously those who don't win, they're clearly still out there doing incredible work. So yeah, just a little bit about that decision-making process.
That's a great question. I mean, I could get a bit philosophical about it. In terms of the Earthshot Prize, I think it comes back to Prince William's real vision that it shouldn't just be about 5 winners, that by being a nominee in the Earthshot Prize and being a finalist, how do we make sure that has a value to the nominees themselves and to the solutions, and gives them the sort of support? It may not be the amount of support that we would give the finalists and the award winners, but how does it become something that creates a halo effect of support and visibility? And that's where our storytelling, I think, really comes in, and telling the story of these solutions is a really important component of what we do, because we think it is in the telling that you spark the world's imagination, and you spark interest, and you spark possibility. So I think one is we actually want everyone to win. And so we are probably the most counterintuitive prize ever, because as much as we're looking for 5 winners, we're looking to make everybody that gets nominated in some way over these years to win. But when it comes back to difficult decisions, I think you always have to go back to what your values are and your filters that come from those values. And you have to sit with your values. And that's really important, to do those trade-offs. I mean, weirdly, I did philosophy at university, which I was told was the most useless degree in the universe at the time, which was helpful. But actually, it's helped me every single day of my career, because sustainability and social impact, particularly within a corporate environment, it's all about ethics, and it's all about values, and it's all about having to make really tough decisions at times. And there are definitely times where, in my history at Nike, we sat as a board and sat as a CEO and made some really hard calls, where we let go of a ton of investment and money in order to comply with our ethics and our values.
I think that's a really interesting point, Hannah. And I think the last few years we've seen a lot of big corporates, big organizations, instill their values and align their values to the sustainability agenda. Deloitte has its World Climate Initiative, which has a number of key targets: reducing emissions, reducing business travel emissions, with lots of dates to hold us account to. And I think it's it's incredibly there's an opportunity cost to those and an opportunity benefit, isn't there? I think, as we're discussing. what advice would you have to someone who needs to try and prioritize, whether that's from a climate perspective or just generally in daily life?
I mean, I think that you just have to think about where you will have the most impact, because I think, in the interactions that we have every day, some will be personal interactions which might have a big impact, but some will be kind of corporate decisions that have a huge impact. And, this is not an easy job to do, actually, in terms of prioritizing and understanding what should be the next move. For me, growing my own team, for me, working on projects with clients and trying to transform some companies, that you have to take difficult decisions. But the way that I typically go about it is think, if I do this one thing, where will it have the most impact? And that tends to help me at least prioritize what I do each day.
Yeah, I think I would say values and impact are the two key litmus tests. And if you lead with your values and you're focused on tangible impact, it won't take you to the easy discussion. Most of the time it requires courage. And I think that's something that we need to acknowledge for all of us. Is often it means it puts you out of place with others and you're the uncomfortable voice in the room. But it is what you can come back to every single day, values and impact.
Yeah, and I think having a kind of clear purpose statement and vision that you hold on to, I mean, it certainly helps me with my own team, where we're on complex projects dealing with sometimes challenging stakeholders. But if we know what we're trying to achieve, holding ourselves to that and those values, like you say, is absolutely critical. And that actually keeps the team working for us as well.
Both of that is incredibly useful, good advice for which we can apply not only for our own green journeys, but also just for our daily lives as well. So I'm slightly conscious of time. I'm gonna ask you the big question, both of you. So you have to fight for who goes first, I suppose, in terms of answering this one. But in a nutshell, where do you start when everything matters?
I think for me, at the beginning every day, so would be my response to that. So I think there's always going to be something to do in this world to make it a better place, to kind of recover ourselves from what's happened over the last 100 years. So I think the understanding that you're not going to fix the world in a day is something that I've had to learn. So I would say that, and in making sure that you've got the right support around you to do that.
That's helpful, Kat, because I try my bit. I make sure that I'm using my reusable coffee cup, and I'm bringing my bags to the shop and things. But sometimes I do feel a bit of climate anxiety generally about not doing enough, and is it really going to make a difference? But that's very helpful. And Hannah, would you be able to answer this week's big question? Where do you start when everything matters?
Yeah, get a plan. I have, get a strategy, have a vision, get a strategy. All the tools that we use in business normally, we use at the Earthshot Prize. We have a vision, a mission, a strategy. We have a strategic house. We have priority areas, and it boils down to a 90-day plan. We're building out our ability to use OKRs. So I think if you start with values and a focus on impact, and you translate it into a plan, and then you just keep coming back to the plan. And my old boss used to say, is this activity masquerading as progress, or is this actually really valuable? And so I think you apply the activity masquerading as progress at the end of the day and go, how much of my day was activity masquerading as progress versus actually progress? And when you apply that litmus test, you get very sharp and focused on what you prioritize on.
I'm slightly wary of doing that, actually, Hannah. But I think excellent advice to us all. And I think Lizzie and I spoke before this. I think we could have put good money on us running out of time for this conversation. But thank you both so much for coming today and talking us through this week's big question. So, Kat and Hannah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. We'll be back next time with another big question. This podcast is produced by our very own pod squad and hosted by George Parrett, Lizzie Elston and Ethan Worth. Thanks to our creative studio for their technical support. Original music by Ali Barrett from our consulting team.